Hello, this is HUIS 512 American Revolution. It's my final research project on salutary neglect. I want to first say thank you to Dr.A and my classmates for a very well done and very uh, beneficial class. I learned a lot and I plan to use this medium of recording and making videos in my own classroom. Today's topic is, did the salutary neglect of England of its colonies cause the American Revolution? And I do believe it did. There are going to be several references to different scholarly sources in this video. Please make sure that you check the abstract and the sources. I don't know how to cite in a video, but I will try to mention the ones that stood out to me. One of the things that I want to do is, there's a scripture that I believe fits this salutary neglect, and it's from Psalms 33:12, and it says, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people he has chosen for his own inheritance." One of the things that is the most polarizing and the most important to remember about salutary neglect is that you got to remember the citizens of whom they are speaking. These were English citizens. These were the House of Tudor, Oliver Cromwell, very faithful, fierce, loyal to the crown. They were the people of England and Germania and that area in Europe fought very hard to have a lineage and a king and a queen, and they thought very much of it. So during the 1600s, when England began to colonize North America, it was very important that those English land grant, or the London Company and the English companies that were sending citizens over here for a new start, understood that they were operate into mercantilism or mercantilism. Mercantilism is the system and the process by why the colonies exist to benefit the economic exists to benefit the mother country economically. So because of that reason, England expected the colonies to produce. But yet, because they knew they had such a strong influence on the culture of salutary neglect, because they knew they had such a strong influence on the citizens, that it was not necessary for them to forcibly enforce the laws of keeping with getting a profit. One of the primary reasons that my research found, especially in James Henryotti's Causes of Salutary Neglect in the American Revolution, was that because of the lucrative production of the tobacco and cotton industries in the West Indies and starting in England, in New England and in the different colonies, there was no need. The money did not stop flowing, so there was no need for England to be dogmatic and force the laws. The Navigation Acts, even though they weren't as effective as they probably could have been, because there was still rampant smuggling, the idea was, as long as the money kept flowing, nobody had a problem. The citizens of England that were in America were able to make money, and the mercantilism was working, where they were sending raw materials back to England, and England was sending manufactured goods to the colonies. Everything was great. The caveat, the turning point, the fulcrum in all of this was when the Navigation Act was passed, but also the French and Indian War. As we all know, anytime there's a war, there's going to be ancillary casualties to this war. There's going to be a cost. And the agenda of King George III to protect his interest in North America from France, and also we had Spain looming, as well as their colony of Florida and most of the West at the time. England had to get a stamp, had to fight for the territory, and because of the 7 years of French and Indian War, that is when the victory was a costly one. Even though they got the Ohio River Valley and they were able to maintain that particular area from France, it came at a very high cost. And because of that reason, King George III and the Parliament and the legislature of England had to come up with a way to be able to enforce it. So in my research, I found that salutary neglect was undocumented through a long-standing British policy avoiding the strict enforcement of parliamentary laws meant to keep the American colonies obedient to Great Britain. Prime Minister Robert Walpole stated that if no restrictions were placed on the colonies, they would flourish. That was the supposition. That was the idea. And it worked for most of the 1600s. It was a good symbiotic relationship. The money was coming in. England was making money. The West Indian colonies, with their brutal slavery tactics, were bringing in sugar and a lot to the crown and making rum through the triangular trade. But however, when France made their move in the Ohio River Valley and we had to fight this war, England had to, on two fronts, and as we know from World War I and II, anytime you fight a two-front war, it's a very high fiduciary cost. So we want to make sure that we understand that as you study salutary neglect. So all of this is leading to all of those things you hear about in the causes of the American Revolution. Now that America, the crown, has to pay, who is going to bear the brunt of the cost? It's going to be the citizens, not the monarchy. So that's when all of these different things happen with the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, all of these different costs. England had no coherent imperial policy before the 1700s. Salutary neglect was a large contributing factor led to the American Revolution, since the imperial authority did not assert its power over that it had. Because, like I told you, King George III was a monarch, like King David, like King Solomon, like King Saul. He did not think that he'd had to enforce these laws. So as we see the French and Indian War coming, the British fighting against France at the same time, 70 War, the Declaratory Acts came, the Stamp Act came, the Townshend Acts, the British parliamentary measures to tax the colonists. All of this was to recoup. And now, watch this. As this is progressing, as this is moving forward, all of the different things that King George III, that indicted him to the colonies, that now is leading to the American Revolution and will now influence the Constitution, directly because of salutary neglect. Because he did not on the front end make the expectation known or did not enforce it, now he has to enact grievances on the colonists, which now became the basis for Patrick Henry, George Mason, and Thomas Jefferson's reticence to have a king or a president because of the grievances. Housing of soldiers to pay for food and housing for soldiers that England no longer could afford. The search and seizure. The search and seizure didn't start from a crime against people. It came from the navigational acts of forcing the smuggling, being able to go into somebody's house and see the things that they are important from France that they're not supposed to import. So all of that being said, this is how the navigation acts, the Stamp Act, the Tea Act, all of these different acts are brought about now, which is becoming more and more egregious to the colonies, but it's almost always necessary for the crown to be able to enforce it. And because I believe, because of the salutary neglect at the beginning, Robert Walpole's supposition that if we leave the colonies alone, they will flourish, it caused an independence to be built up into them. It caused an independence to be able to, it's like when you leave your children alone and they don't have to, it's like Lord of the Flies. If left alone, there will be hierarchy. There will be government. It might not be what we want, but it definitely would happen. And the Bible also says that without a vision, the people perish. They cast off restraint. So because of that reason, we have to understand that salutary neglect and its ancillary effects caused the American Revolution because it was the fruit of a poisonous tree. In police work, in my sociology class, I learned that the fruit of a poisonous tree is that any evidence obtained illegally at the root, any fruit produced from it is also corrupt. So because salutary neglect was a flawed strategy, all of the different ways to recoup the money became more and more egregious, and it became a flawed fruit, and it produced a revolution. I want to conclude by saying that at the end of the day, Edmund Burke says, all there is for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. Well, I believe that he was probably slandering against the colonists, but in my revisionist history and looking back in hindsight, I believe that the men and women of the revolution were in their right as citizens, as Christians, to be able to question leadership. Because if God says, seek the Lord where he may be found and call upon me while he is near, why don't kings have to answer? As they are subjugated and delegated authorities unto God. And King George III had to learn the hard way that blessed are the people whose God is the Lord. They trusted in God, and that David took on the Goliath of the English Empire, and we are here today in the freedom that they gave us because they took that opportunity and chance. Thank you. Please look at my abstract and check out my sources. Many of them were very helpful in obtaining this information. Thank you very much for listening. And this is Mr. Barnett signing off. See you again down the road. God bless you.